welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Jessie Rosen is an author, screenwriter, producer, educator, and speaker. She got her start with the award-winning blog 20 Nothings and has sold original television projects to ABC, CBS, Warner Brothers, and Netflix. Her live storytelling show Sunday Night Sex Talks was featured on The Bachelorette, and her debut adult novel, The Heirloom, is out now. Jessie lives in Los Angeles with her husband and their dog, Louie. Jessie Rosen, thank you so much for coming on, and congratulations on your debut novel, The Heirloom. Kirkus Reviews says The Heirloom is an earnest exploration of the trauma that can follow the children of divorce into adulthood, that emphasizes female autonomy and independence. Library Journal calls it snappy and compelling. Booklist says Rosen's captivating debut features strong family ties, tons of superstition, and romance. And author Annabelle Monaghan says, heartfelt and beautifully told, The Heirloom is mystery wrapped in a love story that calls into question the very subjective meaning we attach to family stories. 5 stars for sure.
Oh, thank you.
With that, what can you tell us about The Heirloom?
Yeah, so the heirloom is based on my own family superstition, which is very strongly held that vintage engagement rings, really all vintage rings, but vintage engagement rings hold the karma from all of the relationships in which they've been worn. So I grew up believing this. And naturally, when it came time for me to get engaged in that pre-period where you kind of know it's coming, I
Mhm.
was expressing this belief to friends and colleagues, and of course, my then boyfriend. And I got so much debate. Some people had never considered this. Some people strongly believed it as well. Some people thought I was ridiculous. And all that chatter just made it so clear to me that this was really rich subject matter.
Mhm.
That was 11 years ago. So in
Wow.
terms of the journey of like having this idea and holding this idea and trying to figure out, that's a hook, but what's the story behind everything? So, coming to understand that this was a story about multiple generations, about the heirloom that my main character Shay receives,
Mhm.
and she hits the road trying to find everyone that ever wore it and succeeding. Heads to Italy, she heads to Portugal, she's back through New York and then returns to LA. But it's really the heirlooms of her own family past that end up being the thing that make her realize how unsure she is about the concept of forever. And the karma and the energy is really masking her fear. And I wanted to talk about those fears. I think that they are very real. And I think
Mhm.
that they can be a really beautiful thing to explore. I really wanted to say that doing that only makes you stronger in the relationship you end up in if you do.
Yeah. You have said that you are fascinated by superstition. You've obviously held some very strong superstitions yourself. What fascinates you about superstition?
I think there's two pieces to it. One, I think it's so cool when there's this belief that's just passed down and down and down. My family does this crazy thing where if you enter from one door of the house, you cannot exit when you leave from any other door. So, like, what is that? It's silly, it's fun, it's a thing we all joke about, it's a thing that bonds us, right?
Uh-huh.
I do that here in Los Angeles, even though my family's on the East Coast. So it's this connectivity. But I think when superstitions get real and when people hold onto them so firmly that they might say, run around the world trying to uncover the history of a ring, then I think there's something else going on. And I think that's something else that why can't I let reality, my love for my fiance, my
Mhm.
belief about our future together. Why can't that be bigger than this belief that has no real evidence of
Mhm.
ever really being true? So I think it's cool. I think it's a place to kind of dig into ourselves.
Yeah, and you did a lot of research into the nature and history of superstition when you were preparing for writing this. What are some of the strangest superstitions that you came across? In addition to coming in and leaving from the same door.
That's the weirdest. There's a lot of superstitions around dates, days, the idea of sharing numbers or dates with a lot of it surrounds people who have been ill, people that had perhaps an ill fate. And so the passing down of that, superstitions about naming children, a ton of those, some of them very good. So in the Jewish culture, using letters in the names of ancestors and then applying them, that's kind of you give goodwill, but also the opposite. And then a ton of stuff about like almost more omens or harbingers, like
Mhm.
owls, very bad luck to Italians. And I knew that from growing up, but I think that's such a fascinating thing. And then birds inside your home. So like if a bird accidentally gets inside your house somehow, it's apparently very good luck. And I don't even, this one I tried to trace because I've heard it in my family and I've heard it from others, cannot
Mhm.
find the origin of it. But I just, some of these you have to wonder if it happened one day and someone felt so bad for the person with the bird in their home that they said, oh, don't worry, it's good luck. And
It's
I,
great
I,
luck.
I love that too. I think that's really fun too. But yeah, there's a lot. And there are people who are superstitious. It's fascinating what they pick and choose. That's one
Mhm.
thing that I really felt was interesting in all my research and conversation with people. And I'm the same. There are tons of things that don't bother me at all. And the things that are my things, forget it. I would never.
How do you feel about owls? Are you an
So,
owl's bad luck person?
so
And do you know where
owls,
that comes from? I'm interested in that one.
no, I don't know where that comes from. And
Mhm.
owls, I don't care at all. And I used to, there's like, maybe you remember this, there was a period of time where it's kind of trendy to wear a necklace that had an owl on it.
Yeah.
Early 2000s. And I
Mhm.
remember walking into my grandmother's home wearing it. And I think my mom saw me first and said, you need to take that off before my mom sees, because it was this owl I was bringing into her home. So no, that kind of stuff I absolutely don't care about. And yet the vintage rings, and
Mhm.
I have a big superstition about, I don't know if this is a superstition or just a practice. I'll never cross out the date on my desk blotter calendar until the next day.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's just a thing and it's been consistent forever.
Why? It's just.
It just feels like tempting fate. And that is something that comes up a lot as a conversation, this concept of why tempt fate? So I think that superstitions that give you bad luck or give you bad energy, and then there's superstitions that kind of tempt the idea of something, it's all something bad happening in general.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, you kind of in your research, you found this interesting correlation between superstition and anxiety.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, and that's something that I really realized in my ramp up to ultimately getting married, that
Mhm.
these superstitions were almost like a calming tool. Okay, if this I is dotted and this T is crossed and this rule is followed and these things are in order, then I'm safer. And
Mhm.
in a situation where, there's so many unknowns, any little thing that can give you a sense of this puts me in better shape, this makes me safer, this puts me on the path to, in the case of my own example and my main characters, happily ever after, in a world where that's so hard to predict. Even the
Yeah.
best relationships, it's so hard. So I think that, yeah, I think it's a mechanism, especially in modern times where we're more aware than ever of the reality of superstition, of just kind of like, okay, like almost like a little mental checklist. I've done all that I could do, and now I can relax. And I felt that way.
And your husband gave you a special gift when you finished writing this book. Is that true?
Yes, so funny you should say that because I was just thinking about getting ready to head out on book tour and what I
Mhm.
was going to pack and bring and all that stuff. And yes, I finished writing the first draft of this book. And this was the Heirloom started as a NaNoWriMo book, National Novel Writing Month book.
Wow.
I had this idea for so long, like I said, and I needed something to force me to finally sit down and get it out. I had been spending most of my career in film and television. So I finished
Mhm.
this first draft. It was such an accomplishment. He was well aware that he'd been with me for a long time. And he presents me with this lovely vintage ring. Hey, congrats. And I was like, I mean, symbolically, that's so thoughtful.
Yeah.
I want to honor the gift. I'm never going to wear this. Do you understand? And so it sits, I have like a very cool kind of old hand, like an iron hand that I put rings on. And so it does, I've allowed it to sit in the room with me. And part of that is because in the process of writing the heirloom, I did come to a different realization and understanding and belief around vintage rings that I gave to my character as a way for her to have some resolution. And also as a way for anyone reading that may be wearing a vintage ring when they're reading my book. I really wanted to make sure and to assure people that there is a happy ending for vintage rings in the story.
Because you also in doing research and talking to people for this ended up having some conversations with people asking their thoughts on it that happen to be wearing
Yeah.
vintage jewelry. Is that awkward times?
Yeah. One very awkward situation in which someone had been through a challenging relationship. And it kind of in my presence occurred to her that the ring was vintage. And the dissolution of that relationship was the absolute right thing. But it
Mhm.
was wild to see that happen before my very eyes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And other people who very proudly wear them and show them to me and say, I love this. I love either the mystery, if they don't know where it's from, if it was bought at an estate jeweler,
Uh-huh.
or the connection to family, if it's an heirloom that is family gifted. So
Yes.
in my story, Shay receives a ring that is from a vintage jewelry shop. It is an unknown origin, and that's why she has to uncover it. But the reason the book is called The Heirloom is not only because of that ring, but because of other pieces of her past that come into the mix.
Yes.
So that title felt like it encapsulated more the sentiment of the passing down of ideas and beliefs and jewelry.
You started out thinking that this book was going to be like a straight up romantic comedy, but that's not how it turned out. It's not a romance in the truest sense of the word in that genre. When did you know that this book was moving in a different direction?
It's really interesting. I have these two male characters that come into play.
Mhm.
And I was really trying to give them all the due and all the development, and I really wanted that romantic piece in it. And all I kept thinking about was the resolution for my heroine.
Mhm.
What I love about romance and romantic comedy is that the resolution really connects those two characters, and it's
Mhm.
about those two characters. And that's what I was raised on, all the rom-coms of my past. And at the same time, this book felt like in order for me to honor the journey of the woman that I wanted to be talking about, the journey of women really
Mhm.
around this moment of getting ready specifically to commit to someone forever, I realized it had to stay with her. And it
Mhm.
had to be, the resolution had to come from her. And then she could step out into one of those romantic relationships and step forward. But it really came from recognizing that this was the central question. This was the central struggle. And so this character was the character that had to have the full focus and to turn it into more a story about the relationship between a woman and herself. And therefore, how does that impact her relationship with these amazing men in her life? So that was really the journey. And I'm so excited by it because I think it's allowed me to say something that I hope comforts women.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. The theme, one of the main themes of the book explores, is anxiety around the whole idea and institution of marriage. right? What made you want to explore this in particular?
So I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. And though the partnerships in my family remained together, which showed me that example of what could be and what a beautiful choice that can be in your life. I also grew up surrounded by families where there was divorce and
Mhm.
saw the impact of that on my many friends as we were growing up. And then I kind of came of age as a woman in a time where marriage became less of a requirement
Yeah.
in terms of the financial security of a woman, even in terms of parenthood, in terms of society's view of women. And I felt that that was really exciting.
Mhm.
So I wanted to look at all of those things and say, how should a woman feel stepping into this? And is it actually okay and wise and kind of romantic if she's really thinking hard about this? I
Mhm.
remember there was a quote, I feel like it was in a nonfiction book, maybe a memoir, maybe even Sheryl Sandberg's memoir, but even so. And it said that the decision of who you'll marry is one of, if not the most important decisions of your life. And that really hit me because,
Mhm.
as a strong, independent woman, I didn't like that idea. And yet, I think there's a lot of truth to it. And
Mhm.
so there's this kind of concept that cold feet is a bad thing. Cold feet is embarrassing. I
Mhm.
even think that cold feet is almost wholly owned by men. This idea of
Mhm.
being tied down to a woman. And I
Mhm.
just think that cold feet is wisdom. And I think, there can be real red flags, and there can just be this moment where you say, what are all the things I need to know to be certain? And do I know them? What
Mhm.
are all the conversations I need to have with my partner? And have I had them?
Mhm.
And that is so romantic to me because it means you're showing up for this marriage with all of yourself and huge respect for the institution. And
Mhm.
I think that that is something that I hope this book says, that I respect whatever decision any person makes around the choice to be married or not. That is now
Mhm.
a choice, and that's excellent. But if you do choose, then yes, this is a storied and long-standing and generational institution. So I think it's exciting to go into it really feeling whole.
Yeah. And the institution of marriage isn't the only theme that this book explores. You're really also investigating familial relationships, mother-daughter relationships,
Mhm.
and generational trauma,
Yeah.
right? Can you
Yeah.
speak to that?
Yeah. This idea that I feel like when therapists talk about it, it's that what you see as a young person and what you grow up experiencing and the relationships and the dynamics almost become like this scaffolding inside your body, that it's really
Mhm.
physical.
Mhm.
So therefore, it can be very, very hard to, as you grow up into adulthood, believe the truths that are right in front of you. Because inside of you are these truths that are so hard to break free from. They feel like yours,
Mhm.
even though they're not. And I talked to a lot of people who did experience parental divorce in their childhood who said they felt like almost as if it was a piece of them that they were fated to repeat. I
Wow.
saw this, and so I'll do this. I experienced this, and so I'll become this. And I think that's so relatable about so many things we go through in childhood that we can overcome.
Mhm.
And I also think it's okay to say that there were things that the adults in our life at the time did their absolute best and still just needed to take care of themselves at a point. And that did have an effect on the children. So I really wanted to express that in the character of Shay's mother. Shay's
Mhm.
mother making ultimately a decision about her marriage that was very hard for the family. And then, without giving anything away, you come to understand what that decision meant to her and how Shay, as a little girl, and Shay, as a wounded teenager, misunderstood some of those things. I really think we misunderstand our parents very often.
Yeah.
And so getting the chance, as we learn early in the book, so not too much of a spoiler, Shay's mother passes away. And there
Mhm.
are conversations left unhad between them.
Mhm.
There are things that she never gets to hear from her mother about the love story of her past. And it's messy and it's complicated. And while I think there's satisfaction in the story, it doesn't get fully resolved because that's the truth of, our heritage.
Yeah, that's the truth of it all, right?
Yeah.
You're a screenwriter and a producer. What made you decide to write a novel?
Such a tricky question. And I will be honest that because of my upbringing, both my career upbringing and my home upbringing, I envisioned this as a film first. So I had this concept and I thought I could, take it in that direction. But there's something very different about the amount of time you can spend telling a story in a novel, of course, right?
Mhm,
Versus film and versus TV. And this felt like I needed to say more and I needed the space to say more.
mhm,
That was a piece of it. I also was very fortunate to have an experience a few years ago of working on a young adult digital publication through an imprint that was releasing books digitally as a path to film and TV. So I had this experience writing prose and I really
mhm.
loved it. And I've been trying to figure out a way to get back to it. And it was just the marriage of, oh my God, this beloved idea of mine. And then this desire to get back to that space. And the third thing I'll confess, I feel like it's important for people to know is the ownership structure, the intellectual property for an author over their books is very different than a screenwriter over their scripts. And
Okay.
the sale process and what you own and how you retain really ownership over the idea is very different, and it is most held in the book world. And I wanted to keep this one in a way that if it ever went to film and television, and we really hope that it might, that
Yeah,
I would have a role in that I would remain attached to this idea as its writer in a stronger, frankly, legal way than I
yeah.
would if I had started it in film and TV.
That's really interesting. I wasn't aware of that. I guess I hadn't thought about it. The ownership that you have as a screenwriter over your work when it sort of goes out into the world versus the ownership that you have over your work as an author when it's going
Yeah.
out into the world.
Yeah. And it can
Yeah.
change. There can always be negotiations, especially on behalf of very, very seasoned television and film creators.
Mhm.
This isn't a blanket thing, but it was the way that I knew based on where I was that I could protect this idea as I
Yeah.
did.
How was the experience of writing a novel different than writing for the screen? And is your process different or does it
I
look
don't know.
the
What process? It was so different. It's so different. I think it's different because, first of all, I had confidence issues around my prose.
same?
So I was so ready to structurally write the story. And I used my film structuring experience to get that outline done. And I had this outline and I felt really solid in that. And I'm so proud to say that over the course of the novel's many edits, the structure really, really did stay.
Yeah.
And, switching your brain off from writing heavy dialogue and exposition and filming TV to writing prose is a very different thing. Finding my voice in that way is a very different thing. I chose to write this in first person because I wanted people to really be with the character. That had its own like really interesting learning curves. So the piece of the puzzle that was hardest for me was finding strategies to contain the story in my head. And that was note carding and that was grids and being sure that I could mentally continue to track the character journey, the pieces with the mother, the pieces with the relationships between the romantic interests, and quite literally creating documents, many of them Excel spreadsheets, so that I could see that. I think
Mm.
that's because I'm a very visual person, a very visual learner, and a very visual writer. But
Mhm.
you know, I started as a blogger, that's 500 words. Then I
Mhm.
moved to half hour television, that's 30 pages, then films, that's 100 pages. This was so much more volume. And
Yeah.
so that was my hurdle, was just making sure I could contain the whole thing so that, there's a lot of reveals and mysteries and kind of things woven throughout this book. And
Mhm.
tracking that was the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Excel spreadsheets, note cards,
Yeah,
what else?
in my Excel spreadsheet, I have I feel like I should just make this available to writers because who knows, and I'm not a
Yeah.
Scrivener. I tried to learn Scrivener and it was harder than writing the book.
I was
So
thinking about that, and I was going to ask you if I've downloaded it, but I'm like, I feel like I need to spend all of this time trying to learn how to use
I
it.
wish. Yeah, I wish I could learn it. So, my grid goes across and it's chapter and it's amount of pages in each chapter because I want to see if they're like out of whack. And
Hmm.
then there's main point of the chapter, and then there's chapter synopsis, and then there's character journey. So I know where my character is. Then there's romantic character journey. Then there's chapter cliffhanger. And so it's such a wild system, but it allows me to really see like what is happening in every single chapter and why. And then because the columns go down, I can also track in a linear way the journeys of the various story pieces that I'm telling.
That's really cool.
It was a very embarrassing window into my mind, but it works for me. And I really feel like whatever, when I talk to writers,
Yeah,
whatever works for you. I kind of figured this out and it's been working for me. But we'll see. I'm in the middle of I'm should be further then, but I'm writing my second book now.
wow.
And here we are again with grid number 2.
When you first get started, when you first sort of have an idea percolating in your mind, what happens then? Are
Mhm.
you what how do you first start out before you're ready to be making the spreadsheets?
Mhm. The first thing I do is I go buy a notebook, quite
Mhm.
literally. I buy a new moleskin. I love a moleskin. I buy a color that feels right and it's dedicated to that project. And then I plan these like yummy, comfortable, fun, whether it's like an outing at my favorite coffee shop or a walk in a pretty place or just like the coziest day at my house. And I dump everything that's been in my brain about the idea into the notebook. And there's no order to it at all. Sometimes it's questions that I'm writing, like a whole list of questions. And sometimes it's character ideas and traits. It's an absolute mess. And I really let myself throw it all at these pages without too much structure.
Mhm.
And sometimes that takes a long time. Sometimes that takes me a week or 2 weeks, maybe even longer before I'm ready to say, I could take some of this and put some structure to it. And then I go through the notebook and highlight things that are like plot things and highlight things that
Mhm.
are character things and start to kind of like port it over into secondary documents and more structural documents that I can start to use. But the first thing is just me, ideas, very, very free.
You are also the founder of a live storytelling show, Sunday Night Sex Talks. How has practicing the art of live storytelling influenced and informed your writing?
I'm almost ready to say it's the number one most helpful thing I've ever done for my writing. And I
Wow.
mean that. And I came to storytelling kind of a little bit backwards. I loved attending storytelling shows. I had moved to Los Angeles. I didn't have a huge friend group, and
Mhm.
I just wanted a sense of community. When you're writing scripts and even articles, it takes a long time for things to come into the world. And when you attend a live storytelling show, it just happens. You tell a story. If it wasn't that great, you move on. You got next month. It
Mhm.
felt so good to have something happen and to
Mhm.
have that feedback. But the feedback, an audience gives you so much information. They give you information about what's funny. That was huge for me because my film and TV work was really more strictly comedy.
Mhm.
There's elements of that in the Heirloom, I hope you'll see.
Mhm.
So that's a huge thing. Where am I funny? What's funny? What do people find funny?
Mhm.
And then where do people stop paying attention? But more importantly, when you're telling a story, you feel yourself rambling. You feel that you've gone too far. And
Mhm.
so the act of writing for that and then speaking it and then practicing it, and I was able to, in hosting my own show, I would tell a new story every single month. And I did the show for 6 years, 6+ years. But then I would also take those stories and participate in other people's storytelling shows. So I'd have the chance to even edit my work and
Mhm.
move forward in that way. So it is such a wonderful opportunity. And I know that now that we're post-pandemic, a lot of storytelling shows are coming back up. I think it's such a cool place for writers to practice. And some shows even allow you to read off of your work. So if you're a writer that's just more comfortable on the page and you're not looking to be a performer, then I think there's spaces for you to work in that capacity too.
How did you come to write? Have you always been a writer?
And my mom will say yes. Both my parents would say yes. My mom, especially when I was very little, I was always writing stories and she would help me, put them on paper. And then she would cut the front and the back of a cereal box because it was about the same size as a piece of paper and bind them for me with little ribbon. And so not only was I always dreaming up stories and creating them, but I was always very, very encouraged in that direction, not only by my family, by many teachers, many friends. I had, as I was coming up and I had full-time jobs in order to start to slowly make this life a reality. I'll never forget, I had a wonderful boss in my marketing job who was just doing everything she could to make sure I could do this, and she was supporting me in that direction. And it was, so I really do think that the people in my life have allowed this to happen for me. And I still think that being a writer and a person that loves to write was always with me and would always be with me. Making writing your career is a really different thing. I feel like it's important to say that because there are people who may not be able to make writing their sole source of income. And I never want them to feel like they're not writers, that they shouldn't keep writing, that they can't publish, whether it's in a self-publishing capacity or any other thing that might come up. So I feel so torn about my career in writing versus my identity as a writer. And they get very mixed and rather codependent sometimes. But I think it's important almost to like work on keeping those things, understanding the difference between those things, because this is a rejection-based industry.
Yes.
So in order to keep going, I've had to continue to believe that it was more worth it to keep trying to tell stories than it was to accept how hard it is. And I see that in so many of my peers and colleagues. So yeah, I think it's really, I don't know that I could reverse everything I did and end up back here. It's impossible. There is no true clear path. Maybe that's what makes it exciting.
Well, yeah. And what was your path? What was the road to publication for you?
So for this book in particular, I had already literary reps in the film and TV world. And most importantly, they were very supportive of their TV and film writers branching out into prose and books. My manager, Rachel Miller at Haven Entertainment, has done that journey with many of her film and TV clients. And very early on, she said to me, I want you to think about writing books. And I said, you're crazy. That's too much. So I had that support. We together helped get my first draft into shape and then pursued my agent, Molly Glick. I had worked with Molly much earlier in my career on that young adult work that I did. And she was at a different agency at the time. So she moved agencies and we approached in that way. And again, thank goodness, she really dug in. I think this is rare for an agent, and gave me a big round of notes. So Molly Glick and Lola Bellier, who were at CAA, together dug in with me and we worked on it again, and then finally took it out to sale. And when we did take it out, it was a very fast and exciting sale process. So the Heirloom sold in a week, which was just an absolute dream of dreams. And ultimately, I was able to get a 2-book deal through that process. So it was 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years getting ready for that point, multiple drafts, and then really fast when it finally came together. It was just a total thrill.
How did you get started with screenwriting?
Yeah, I was a blogger, which is dating me, but I came out of college. I had done a college newspaper article work, and I had a college column, and I was working in marketing and public relations in Manhattan. And I was sending emails about my experience as a 20-something in Manhattan to this group of friends that I had. And someone said, could you just put these on a blog? I'm sending this email to 5 friends. She's sending it to 5 friends. And so blogging became the start of my public writing without an intention. I thought I would go back to that stuff I was doing in college and kind of be a magazine writer, which was very much a dream for a girl that kind of came of age in the 90s. That was like the joy. And very, very kindly, someone was reading the blog, which was very dialogue heavy, and said, have you ever thought about writing film and television? This feels like it would lend itself to that. And she said, I have a small theater company. So if you wanted to practice by writing some one-act plays or some fun stuff, you could come over here and do that. And so I went to the Barnes and Noble in Union Square and I got a book on one-act plays because I just didn't have, that wasn't my training. I was a communications major, but not with a focus on that kind of writing. And when you write something and then people perform it, it was very magical to me. I thought it was so fun to be in that process and to give voice to something and then to see how people interpret it and to work with them on that. And I really got the bug, and it made sense because I was such a television and film lover growing up. I mean, that was really the rom-coms of my youth were really that. And so about a year and a half after that, practicing writing scripts that were very bad, I put on my own play in New York, a very vagina monologues. It was called The Hookup Conversations. Oh my gosh, it was so fun. And there was a manager, a television and film writing manager from LA who happened to be visiting New York and attended the show. And she signed me and suggested that I make the move to LA. That was 3 managers ago. So it did not, that was, I got to Los Angeles, that person left the business. I had to do my climb again. None of my scripts were any good. I had to work them again. And so it was a long journey, but it's funny, right? It's like, because I had done the blog, because I had put my writing out there in any way, shape, or form. And I always say this to writers, another thing happened because I was in this feedback loop with my work. And I think sometimes because it's so scary, and it was every time I published a blog post, it was the scariest thing I ever did. I thought like people are going to read this, but allowing your work to be seen and critiqued, and then for people to say, I see you doing this, which is exactly what happened to me. What about this? That wouldn't have happened if my work hadn't been public. So in any way that I think writers can get their work out there so that chain of reactions can start to happen, I think is just huge.
That's a really great point. Just getting the work out there and growing from that point, getting in that conversation with your work and with the people that can read it.
Yeah.
What is your writing routine like now? You're working on book 2.
Yeah, it's so strange now because right in this moment we're about to launch book 1, which is so exciting. It'll pub next week, and then I'm equally working on book 2. I think a few things have always remained consistent with my routine, which is I plan and plan and plan, and that can look like writing on note cards, but that can also look like hiking with my dog. I'm thinking, and then when I sit down to write, if I'm ready, the writing can happen quickly. And I learned that sometimes I get in situations where I have to sit at the document and push my way through because I didn't have the time to prepare, and it's time to write chapter 12. But the more I can give myself the space to think and talk to friends and hash it out and write about it in my journal again, like go back to that Moleskine notebook, then when I sit down, I can get into a better flow and the chapter or the paragraph can come quickly. And then there are a few things that I've kind of developed like for my body and mind that have really become very consistent things. So especially when I'm doing multiple things at the same time, I have some awesome meditation tracks through Insight Timer, which is a free app that reset me. So if I've been recording a podcast in the morning and it's time to work on my writing in the afternoon, I'll do that. I'll sit down for that 15 minutes. I'll lay down. I'll listen to the meditation. Some of them are about focus. Some of them are kind of like a nice sound bath sound that just like calms me down, because dividing my time so that I'm singularly focused on the writing is something that I have to do. And then I've just learned to give myself space. So it's not possible for me to write in crowded places like coffee shops anymore. That was kind of something I was able to do at certain points, but editing, yes, writing, no. So just like understanding what the boundaries are that need to happen to allow me to do good work,
Mm-hmm.
and then not being ashamed to express those needs.
Yeah.
I'm in a marriage, so saying to my husband, I need the house, I need the space for this amount of time, or I need to invest in a co-working space. And so I'm going to be investing money in that to go to that place. And I think when you're a writer and the income can flow differently,
Mm-hmm.
it often doesn't feel like you're at work. This is the work day. I have to go to this office for my job, because a lot of writing is speculative.
Mm-hmm.
So I have tried to find that shift throughout my career so that I understand and give my writing the priority that it deserves in order
Yeah.
to really get it done.
What do you know now that you wish you had known before
Mm.
publishing your first book?
Hmm. I think I wish I had known that people read it as themselves. I was really worried in the beginning, and I
Mm-hmm.
got great advice on this, but I was really worried about making sure I was thinking about every reader.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this type of woman and this type of man and this type of aged person, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to make sure I was writing something that pleased all of them. Like I
Mm-hmm.
crossed off every person on the list in MI. And it got really great advice from my editor, Kate Dresser at Putnam, to start with me.
Mm-hmm.
Express what I need to say, that there is universality in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there will be things that people don't connect to with the book.
Yeah.
And so that keeping it here so that I wasn't getting distracted in my journey about, well, if my character does this, it might make that person upset.
Mm-hmm.
I really had to think about that. I think that comes from my personality and some things I'll probably be working on forever. But it helped to make the book more specific. It really did. And I think that whether, interestingly, I do think universality sometimes comes from the specific,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
really express it through that character and explain her enough to make it make sense for that character, not for everyone. That's what people relate to.
Yeah.
And so I've been working on keeping that with me for my second book, because the subject matter and the journey is equally tricky. It's about the concept of astrology. It's about a person finding herself after a very, very long time of not knowing herself. And
Mm.
so there's some depth in there. There's some me in there. And I'm really trying to learn to close off the idea of the peanut gallery for now.
Yeah. Traditional last question is actually a perfect one for you since you are a screenwriter. When the Heirloom is made into a series or movie, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh my gosh, what a good question. Oh, this is tough. What should the theme song be? There's almost this like need for it to be something that speaks to heritage or mothers and daughters. I have this like love of all things Joni Mitchell. So here's what I'm going to
Mm.
pitch. Okay, I don't know the song. I don't know the song, but it's a Joni Mitchell song. Listeners can help with this.
Okay.
It's a Joni Mitchell song, but it's covered by Sarah Bareilles.
Oh,
Okay. Is that enough?
that's
So like,
good. Yeah.
I want something that has like a ton of heritage
Mhm.
and feels like it's from the generation of my main character's mother, and she would have been like 60s, 70s, like a Joni Mitchell. But I think
Mhm.
that someone like a Sarah Bareilles, or someone like a in that capacity with that like really singer-songwriter could then give it a vibe of today.
That's great. Love it.
Yeah.
Jessie Rosen, thank you so much for coming on. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it was so nice to get to share some of this. And thanks for all you do to make the writers and the writing worlds feel a little bit more comfortable.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.